October experience each year, I think for the last 3 years, of coming to visit with you. I come from the western area of Sydney, out near the Blue Mountains, and go to the Kellyville Church. So greetings from the Kellyville Church. My wife was to be with me till the last minute, till my son last minute rang up and said, I have to take the song service in Access. Could you come and sing with me? And my wife said, he never asked me to sing. And so I lost to my son. And so she's singing with him in Access Church service today at Kellyville. I did leave a message as to what my sermon was about, but TBA is as good as any. The title of my sermon today is, and I have to learn to use this. They gave this to me and I said, I have never used one of these things before. So here goes. Let's see what we can do. I left a script up there and I said, if I get this wrong, then the script is there and it says frame number and you can press the button up there. There we are. That's me. I don't believe it, but that must be about 66 years ago because I'm 72. The title of my sermon is Mother Did a Hannah on Me, or Things I've Learned or Am Learning Along the Way. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, and the son of Zaph, an Ephraimite. And I love starting a sermon like that because I can't even get my tongue around it. And he had 2 wives. Now that's a problem. The name of one was Hannah, the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And also the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. Whenever the time came from Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. Notice, all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. That sparks a problem. And you know the story, I'm sure, of Samuel and his mother, Hannah. It's a story that's filled with very fragile people. The vulnerable wife who had to deal with her husband's favoritism of another woman. And so she offloaded her vulnerability onto the other woman, Hannah, the favored one. Hannah, who, though having her husband's preferential treatment, had bought the lie that her only worth was if she had children. She couldn't see value in anything else in herself, except should she have children. And I like the husband. He buckled at the knees when he thought that despite his extravagant care and concern and love for Hannah, he was not enough to make her happy. Aren't I of more value to you than 10 sons, he said. It was all about Elkanah. And so there's this scenario where these fragile people are jostling with feelings and emotions about their circumstances. And Hannah seeks a child to deal with her low sense of self-worth. What a way to bring a child into the world. I will have worth when I have a baby. And so she makes a bargain to God. Make me feel accepted by giving me a child, and I'll give that child to the ministry. Which is precisely what my mother did to me. Mother and father had left, going off to church. Now the various issues are evident. It was the wartime, things were tough. He was sent to a country town to rescue a dying business where he had no support networks. He was working too many hours a day. He was hurt by a minister of the church when he'd done a special job for him with products that were hard to come by during the war. and this minister poured contempt on the favour that my father had done for him. But perhaps there was no doubt a tenuous connection with Jesus. Mother had already had one son, my brother, who was 4.5 years older than I, born when they were not going to church. And so when she was expecting me, she began to feel guilty about not going to church. And so she bargained with God, God, please accept me back, and I will dedicate this child to the ministry. What a way to come to God. But I can't judge what my mother did, because I have found myself all too often coming to God in similar ways. God, if you will just do this, or if you'll just do that, I will do this, or I will do that. What do you think God thinks of such a bargain? Well, one thing I'm learning about God, He doesn't care about the quality or fragility of your faith, the faultiness of our contact with Him. You only have to look at Hannah's story, or that of the man who brought the child to Jesus to have his child healed of the evil spirit, where he said, Lord, if you can. Jesus says, if you had a faith as a grain of mustard seed, you could say this. He simply says, He knows our frame, and He remembers we're dust. He simply says, and I'll see if I can do this, come unto me. Whoever you are, wherever you are, however needy you are, and to an extent, however flawed your motives, come unto me, and I'll give you rest. And so I was raised from birth to understand that my future was already mapped out for me. I was to be a minister of religion. Now there's a danger in what many people do to their children. I've met grown children who carry a sense of failure because they did not fulfill their parents' dreams for them. They did not become a doctor or a lawyer or some other seemingly revered and respected position in life. They chose instead to be a plumber, and where would we be without them? A truckie, a chef, a prison officer, a night fill person. Yet they revealed a talent and evidence a giftedness and a dedication to whatever they chose. I've met others who fulfilled their parents' dream and became a doctor or a politician or whatever, and deep down they were never, ever happy. They were in positions they never really wanted. And let me be clear, I'm not saying that these were bad parents. Life is full of good people who sometimes function on bad rules. Good people, bad rules. And we found ourselves in unacceptable journeys. We've been exposed to far from ideal conditions ourselves, and we wanted what we thought would be an answer be found in our children. Good people. And so Mother came back to church and proceeded to try to lead me in the direction of being a minister. As I grew, I was to be different. When my brother went to the theatre, I stayed home because I was different. When he went to dances, I was to be the example to him and to be a mentor to him. 4.5 years older than me he was. Deep down inside, I envied my brother because he was doing the things that I wanted to do. Do you know the strange thing? When talking about it years later, my brother shared with me that he envied me back there because he saw me as doing the right thing. You see, my problem was I never bought the deal. Samuel bought the deal. I never bought the deal. At night, I never heard the voice of God calling, "Barry, Barry." Then I might not have been in the right place to hear such a voice. Samuel was. And one day after school, I exploded through the door at home and I said, "I'm going to be a teacher." My mother's face dropped. Silence ensued for a bit. I was reminded of my mother's promise to God. And I went off to train to be a minister. I got A's in Greek, did well in English, archaeology, evangelism. I blew a 40-page essay. I think the title was something like "The Soteriological Significance of the Person of Christ," which I think I now know means the significance of the person of Jesus Christ as it related to salvation. Why didn't they just say that? 11 years later, I blew marriage and family out of the water and the ministry, and I thought my mother's dreams. Strangely, while I had not grown in faith, my mother had. She no longer held God to a bargain. Her faith in God was so strong, her ministry to the church was so beautiful, and to her community it was like a healing stream, as it was also to me. No condemnation, no recrimination, no judgment, simply love. God had taken this vulnerable, insecure woman and developed her into a loving creature, empowered and empowering child of God. She now understood that ministry is what we are called to, every one of us, to do with our gifts, our talents, our abilities, which God has given to us, wherever we are and whatever field we work in. That's one thing that I've learned, or another thing that I've learned, and am still learning along the way. Paul summarized it like this. He talked about there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it's the same God at work. The manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. And he talks about to some that are given wisdom and knowledge and faith and healing and miracles and prophecy, discernment and languages. But he distributes to them each one just as he determines. This is not a bargain that I can make for somebody else. This is something that God does when I am willing to place myself in his service. God desires that we use whatever we have been given or have developed in ministering to others. But later in the chapter, he reminds us that we do not all have what stares people in the face as obvious gifts. In chapter 13, or just at the end of the chapter, he said, look, seek earnestly the better gifts. And immediately goes into chapter 13 and he alerts us to something that goes well beyond the spectacular, the miraculous and heady gifts. He said, faith, hope and love rise above them all, but especially love. If you can love, you have the greatest gift that God could give any person. For love is not passive. It is creative interaction within all our spheres of contact with others. When you go to work of a morning and you love your fellow men and your boss, you have the greatest gift that God can give. When you treat the person who overtakes you and cuts you in on traffic and gives you the middle finger, if you can still love, you have the greatest gift that God can give every man. Ministry is what we are called to do with the gifts, the talents, the abilities and weaknesses which God and experience of life has given to us, to be used for the poor and the oppressed, the sick, the blind, or the challenged, the prisoner and the refugees, or simply our family, our relatives, our neighbours, our school, and the people we work with. Ellen White, in a number of her writings, has expressed a view that the greatest argument in favour of Christianity is a loving and lovable Christian. You think it's knowing how to give a Bible study? That's great. But she says the greatest argument in favour of Christianity is a loving and lovable Christian. It's an argument in favour of God that no atheist can gainsay, and the most amazing ministry that has been given to each and every one of us. There is no age restriction with this ministry. There is no retirement from this ministry. Children and retirees can exhibit it. Little deeds of kindness, little acts of love have been known to break down barriers between members of families, neighbours, communities. If you look at the Middle East, and we talked about it this morning, if only people knew love. Lifts heavy burdens from the shoulders of the struggler and the disheartened. But above all, love has opened doors that have led people to know and understand the love of God that passes all understanding. That's something I'm learning along the way. But I wanted you to notice a section of this chapter that we've not always emphasised. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, it's not for that reason to stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it wouldn't not for that reason to stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? Those parts of the body that seem to be, what's the next word? Weaker, are what? Indispensable. We tend to think churches belong to the people that have the heady gifts, don't we? We think the person who can get up and give the sermon, we think the person who can go and do this marvellous act, or whatever. The body of Christ, you feel weak, you're indispensable. Do you think you don't have much to give? You're indispensable. God uses what we have, even our weaknesses. This is what Paul says. God said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." And Paul goes on to say, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." You see, God desires to use even our weaknesses. Ellen was a person who worked with me, because I work in corrective services, and she worked with me as a probation officer. And we were talking about methods of reaching into people's lives and talking to them and building bridges so that you can draw people out. And she was observing what my fellow unit leader and myself were doing, and she was really good. She had good, clear boundaries. She was simple in the way she approached it. She was building good bridges to people. And during the discussions of way to engage people, she looked at me and she said, "I could never do what you and George do." I said to her, "You don't have to. What can you do? What are the things you've found work for you?" And I told her the story. She's not a Christian, In fact, if anything, she's probably an atheist. And I told her the story of David and Goliath. David came to the battlefront one day, a youth fresh from tending the sheep and mostly there to just bring food to his brothers. When he arrived in the army camp, he heard a booming voice bellowing insults at the Israelites' God, and he noticed that not only the army not doing anything about it, they were shaking in their armour. David's overcome by zeal for God and volunteers to fight Goliath. And so he's led in to King Saul, who was a man that was head and shoulders above him. And after some persuasion, the king caves into David's enthusiasm, dangerous as it was for Israel, because in those days, if your champion went out to meet the other champion and your champion lost, it meant your whole army then became subject to the other person. So this was a crucial battle between David and Goliath, because it meant either slavery or freedom. And the king gives in, but he says, I want you to wear regulation army gear. So he gets his own armour out and he says, David, put it on. David put it on and couldn't move. He tried to pick up the king's sword. It was too heavy to lift, let alone to swing. David says, I can't do this your way. And he strips the gear off, picks up his staff, walks out to face the giant with a sling and 5 small, smooth pebbles he picks up on the way. Goliath is incensed. A sling and 5 pebbles in the hands of a child? You insult me? And he boasts what he will do with David. A boy, 5 small stones, and God. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. Weakness, strength. Weakness, sling, and some stones against a giant with armour. But in the hands not of David but of God, those little weaknesses became powerful in destroying the enemy. David couldn't fight in someone else's armour. He had what he knew and what had worked before, and weak as it would appear, and he used in league with God to break down a giant. And I said to Ellen, what do you do well? Use it, refine it, practice it, and your natural ability will give you authenticity in forming bridges to communicate, to break down barriers. Are you a good cook? Invite your neighbour into your home and cook and talk and build bridges. And you never know when you might bring down the giant in their life. You know, every time Ellen passed me that day, she said, that's a good story. That's a good story. I said, you know where it's found? It's in the Bible. And left it there. When you face a crisis, when you're faced with giant decisions or are impressed to engage in some daunting task, you do not go into the field alone. You do not go into the field alone. Give God what you have. With Moses, it was a stick. It may seem pitifully inadequate. So what? Give it to God who says, my grace is made perfect in weakness. Powerful. whether it's 5 small stones, 5 loaves and 2 fishes, a handful of flour, or some oil in a jug, little is much if God is in it. I want you to listen to the words of this song. Wonder if it's ready. May come, electronic gadgetry. Not going to play for us, is it? You may know the song. It's one of the Gaither vocal band's songs. Little is much when God is in it. And I think maybe it'll come through. If not, maybe at the end it just may come through. We don't know. We have the disc. Ready to roll, is it? Not going. Okay. 1 minute and 18, 1 hour and 18 minutes through, but it's not going to come up. Okay. Going back to scratch on it, are we? Waiting for us to find 1 hour and 18 minutes in it. Just dip into your minds and your thoughts and your senses of things, and just think how much you concentrate on how little sometimes you have to offer. And think of yourself as the little boy that came with the 5 loaves, 2 fishes. And just think about this song as they play it. Let it come through. That's the right spot. No, it's not going to work. We won't worry about it today. Thanks for trying. We'll go back to the. Can we go back to the PowerPoint now? I want to share with you a worldview, a life script, and a weakness that I developed as I grew up. If we can go back to the PowerPoint there. I received my validation as I grew up by developing a good memory. Okay? A good memory. My mother would send me to the corner shop without anything written down, with a list of things to bring back. I wouldn't forget a thing. I bet my wife wishes I still had that ability. She says, you bring home the things you think of, but you've forgotten the things that I said to bring home. I bet, I think that when I came home from school and I'd studied for a while, I'd give my study books to my father, and I'd say, would you please quiz me on this, because I've got a test tomorrow. And he would ask me a question, and I would tell him word for word what was written in that book. Until one day he said, so what page is it on? And I told him, and he couldn't believe it. However, when it came to developing concepts around the information and applying it in different circumstances and scenarios, I was ultra cautious. I was hesitant to raise ideas or to share ideas with people. I'm not sure whether this was because my well-meaning father often overruled my decisions. I don't know. I can't be sure. Overall, he was a man to be admired. His father had left my grandmother when he was quite young, and he became, as it were, a surrogate partner to my grandmother. He wrestled his brothers into obedience to their mother while struggling to have a consistent education himself. His family went through hardship. When he grew up, he even tried selling margarine from door to door in the war years, the holes in his shoes being negated by inserting cardboard from Weet-Bix packets into the shoes. He was a hard worker and a determined one. Out of this hardship came a strong care for widows in the community and for people going through hard times, often assisting them even when times were tough for ourselves. I can remember one day, many a time he got people sort of spat, if you like, upon what he did for them. Out of his little, we gave. And I can remember someone coming to the door with a hard luck story once, and my father disappeared into the kitchen and said to my mother, Maud, as her name was, Maud, please help me, I feel a good turn coming on. We didn't have much, but he knew how to share it. And I honour my father for that. But I think Dad lost track of his growing children as he was in the Fire Brigade Board, the Home and School Association. He was an alderman, he was deputy mayor and a businessman. He was still overriding our decisions when we were over the age of 18. So you fellas that are 14 get upset with your parents because they say no, you didn't get to 18, 19 and 20. Whatever the reason, I didn't raise ideas or share concept with others. I had ideas, and inside I thought, that's a good idea, but don't ask me to share it. No way. Would I prove to be mistaken? Would I be ignored? Would I be overruled? Instead, if I wanted to share something with someone, I would ask questions. You can't be wrong if you ask a question, can you? Besides, if it was wrong, it came out of their mouth, not mine. Most of the time I managed quite well, although a person who can't divulge what is inside of him can seldom become close to people and have in-depth friendships or be intimate. And then one day I was challenged. I was asked to become a group facilitator for the corrective services, to run a group entitled Male Anger and Aggression for people who had belted their wives, belted up people in the community. Now, there are some funny stories I could tell you about that experience. However, a not so funny part of my position was to attend staff meetings where we had to share what was happening in our groups, where we were taking the group, what was happening in our group, and how we were managing it. Now, some of the other facilitators had studied psychology, and so they would come out with these great ideas and these, what Jungian, I don't know, whatever you like to call it, concepts, cognitive behavioural school, and I would sit there in silence. I would be analysing what they're saying, but there's no way I would commit myself. And one day I needed to say something, and I asked a question. And there was dead silence. So I asked the question again. Dead silence. By this time, I'm really uncomfortable. And I go to reframe the question again, and the leader of that attendance centre looked at me square in the eye. He said, I heard the question. What's the statement? And I wriggled and I squirmed and I tried to formulate, no, I heard the question. What's the statement? That was one of the hardest moments of my life. I finally made the statement, and it was cool, and it was comfortable, and people responded. This man later told me he'd hired me for my weaknesses and not my strengths. Would you like to hear that from your boss? I wanted to kill him for 2 years. And then it dawned on me, he hired me to facilitate a group for highly resistant people who had developed a reactive process to anybody who would ever try to tell them anything. They didn't need a person up at a blackboard writing things on there. School had failed them. What he needed was someone who could ask the kind of questions that would assist people to understand some of their own processes and come to their own conclusions. You see, my weakness was a strength in the right place and the right time. When I give it to God, it's never stronger. It's a hard lesson that I've learned. But let's go back to what Paul says. When I'm weak, then I'm strong. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardship, in persecution, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I'm strong. And listen to what he says a little bit further down. For I am not in the least inferior to the super apostles, even though I am nothing. That is something very important that we need to take on board. What if you do fail? What if you make a mistake? What if it's a mammoth mistake? What if things go astray for us? What if we come unstuck? Sometimes society doesn't let us forget about it. People go to court and are sentenced over some matter that they've done. Society then ordains that they are criminal. They have a criminal record. To the majority, they become called the crims. It's as if people put on a pair of spectacles through which they look at people. Spectacles that help them define who that person is. Isn't that what the woman at the well struggled with? She was an adulterer, it says. The Pharisee said if he knew what manner this person was, he wouldn't let her to touch him. They had her in a bag. Now, I'm not by means wanting to justify people's behaviours. Some behaviours engaged in have horrific consequences for others, and people need to be called to account, whether it's in the church or out of the church. But sometimes view keeps a person frozen in their past. I remember a young man who was asked about what it was like to be in his home. How did his parents perceive him? What was going on there in the neighbourhood? School, and he said his parents were worried he'd become a criminal. And I said, what about the neighbours? And he said, they suspected I'd become a criminal. And at school, he said, they were sure I was going to be a criminal. And here I am. He said, and here I am. Wow. Another young man sat before me in an interview and moaned about his lot and stated he'd never be able to get a job now because he had a criminal record. And I heard him for so many times. I finally, when I used to wear glasses, and I didn't have these internal intraocular lenses, I took my glasses off and I said, here, put on my glasses. And he did. I said, what'd you do that for? He said, because you told me to. I said, do you need glasses? He said, no. Does the world look better through my glasses? No. Then why would you put them on simply because I said put them on? And we talked for a while about how he'd accepted other people's, society's limitations placed on him in his criminal history. How he'd accepted other people's view of him. Rather than a person who'd committed some crimes against society, he'd accepted the label criminal and had boxed himself in. We discussed how he could challenge these perceptions and limitations. At times when I note that people have some Christian connections, I can talk about what our God does for people. Unfortunately, in many cases, I'm not permitted to do that. But where I can, I use the yardage and talk to them about a God who sets at liberty them that are bound, the recovery of the blind. He didn't come into the world to condemn sinners, but that the world through him might be changed. But it's not just people who have criminal histories who become limited by their past. People's attitudes and familial, societal, and oftentimes religious type shame messages keep people bound. I wish as Christians we were less judgmental and more open-armed. I wonder what it'd be like if someone said, "Hello, there's a new person in our congregation. Would you like to announce?" "Yes, my name is Fred. I'm an alcoholic." I wonder what would happen in our churches. And yet in Alcoholics Anonymous, people can openly state their struggle and gain support. Less prone to place labels on people and more focused on pointing them to the one who can set them free from their limited self-view. Jesus once said that following the following words to a woman who'd accepted society's view of her and their treatment: "Where are your accusers? Doesn't anybody accuse you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." I think what he's saying is, and live the life that was meant for you. I have learned that it's not my sin or my mistakes that ultimately define me. It is what I do about it when it dawns on me. Do I endlessly repeat the same action expecting a different result? Or do I learn from the past and seek the solution and freedom and God's forgiveness? You ever watch little children learning to walk? Someone was talking about a little baby here, and you're going to watch that little baby learn to walk. One day, all of a sudden, this little child understands the rest of the world's getting around like this, and they're getting around like this. And they go over and they grab hold of something so they can be like this. And it might be the tablecloth, because they have no idea of fixtures and fittings. And they haul themselves as if they're going to get up, and everything on the table comes down. They whack their face against the table leg. There's a bruise, a cut lip, a wail. In comes the parent. The critical moment, what comes out of their mouth is most important. A kiss and a cuddle, an excited look on the parent's face. You're trying to stand up. And 5 seconds later, what's happening? The little one is trying to stand again. Because children do not know failure. They only know what they were setting out to do. And they don't hold that failure in their consciousness. But adults, they fall flat in their face and sit and lick their wounds for the next 5, 10, 20 years. They are Peter sinking beneath the waves, or more to the point, the paralytic at the pool of Bethesda, there for centuries. Jesus went beyond his helplessness and his hopelessness, and he said, "Rise." That's the first step. Life's not determined by your circumstances. Get up. Take up your bed. Second step. Own your mistake. Pick up the problem. Attend to it. It'll become your witness point. And walk in the power I'll give you. Paul was overwhelmed as he contemplated the glory of God, often hidden by the tragedies that hit our path or the mistakes that temporarily blot out his pathway. He has this ecstatic proclamation in Romans 8. There is therefore now no condemnation to them who are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. And he finishes the chapter with these beautiful words: who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? As it's written, for thy sake we are killed all day long. We're accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Isn't that wonderful? Why keep history in our sights? So these are the things that I've learned along the way since my mother did a Hannah on me. He doesn't care about the quality and the fragility of my faith. He says, come. Ministry is ministering with the gifts and talents and abilities and time which God has given to or developed in us wherever we are. If you can love, you have the greatest gift of all. God uses our gifts, whatever we have, and more often than not, it will be our weaknesses because our strengths get in his road. It's not my sins or my mistakes or my circumstances that ultimately define me. And above all, beyond the shadows and the cross of our minds, shines the sun with power and healing in his wings, and we have nothing to fear. That's my story. I hope it hasn't bored you to tears, but they're things that I've learnt along the way. What's your story? What have you learnt along the way with God? Why don't you tell it? It's the most powerful witness you can give. What God has done in and through and for you will have an impact in somebody else's life. God bless you. No matter whether you came behind the 8 ball, God loves you. Whether you think you've got talents by the hundreds or 5 small stones and a fish and a little bit of oil. God can do wonders with your talent. A stick in God's hands, not Moses, took him through the Red Sea.